Hello everyone, this is Skylar Fox. Recently, I had just animated a video exclusive to Nerd Odyssey. It is an opening sequence to a hypothetical anime called Battle of the Brand. Today, I am going to be giving a general overview over how this video was made. So if you haven't already, make sure you head on over to Nerd Odyssey's channel and watch that video first, and then come back here when you're done. A little over 2 years ago, I reanimated the third opening of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but this time using villains from the Kingdom Hearts series. I had a lot of fun making this video and had the desire to make another anime opening type of video. But this time, I wanted to be a little more creative with it. I didn't want to simply reanimate an anime opening that already existed, but instead I wanted to create a brand new opening from scratch for a hypothetical anime that doesn't really exist. Around the time, memes around brands on social media pretending to have a personality started becoming more common, like how Wendy's Twitter account is dedicated to roasting McDonald's and making hot, bold takes, or how Arby's would make nerd culture references to things like upcoming movies, video games, or anime. So I decided that the hypothetical anime would be about fast food brands in an all-out war, fighting for every potential customer. I then centered the opening around a single protagonist who was getting hungry at about lunchtime and was thinking of a place to eat at, only to then get bombarded with every corporate mascot seeking to pull her into their restaurant. So generally, the first thing I do when making projects that contain music and/or vocals is actually to place all the audio in the video editor first before animating a single thing. When deciding the song that would play in this video, I didn't want to go for anything really obvious or recognizable. If I was to go with a song like Naruto Shippuden's Silhouette, or any of the Attack on Titan songs, they'd serve more as a distraction from the actual video at hand. So what I ended up going with was this niche Japanese group called Get in the Ring, who make vocal songs based loosely off of the Toho soundtrack. I decided to go with their song Dance Floor. I felt that this was a good match because the song definitely sounds like something that you'd hear in an anime opening, but most people would not have actually heard this specific song before, so it still feels unique. Once I have the audio in place, I time all of the events in my head according to the music, and place markers where I want certain scenes to occur. That way, when I start animating, I'll be able to segment portions of the song to ensure that the visuals never go off sync. Then I began making the 3D character models. In the past on this channel, I've created 3 separate videos in which I go over my general process for creating characters, so I won't bore you with any of that information again. But if you haven't seen those videos before and you're interested in learning more about my general process for making character models, feel free to watch those videos. Because I wanted to go for a more stylized look for this video, I didn't really worry too much about any specific details. The idea behind the visuals wasn't necessarily to trick anyone into thinking that the video is 2D, but really just to test my skill at creating a 3D animated video that could be stylized to be similar to 2D. There are a lot of different techniques and plugins that companies and artists will use to try and achieve this effect, but for the scope of this project, I decided to keep things fairly simple. In Cinema 4D, I created an infinite light, and I turned on ambient illumination. With this, it creates this sort of flat shading where everything is lit evenly. Then I go into my render settings and I add an effect called Sketch and Tune, which will render everything in flat colors and will allow you to customize the background, shading types, and the type of outline that you would like the characters to have. In this case, I just wanted to have the black outline around the character, so I turned off the background and the shading, so that way the shading is just what is default in Cinema 4D. If I wanted to, I could tell the main light to cast a transparent hard shadow automatically, but I very rarely actually did this, and I will go over why in just a moment. When animating the video, most of the scenes were set to the frame rate of 12 frames per second. This is because most scenes in anime are animated with 12 frames per second, as opposed to the usual 24. There was a couple of scenes I animated at 15 frames per second just for the sake of smoother animation, but I always stuck with rendering under 24 frames. However, when going for a frame rate that low, I knew that I would need the animation to generally be a little more exaggerated than how I would animate at something that was 24 frames per second. One of the main reasons I think Berserk 2016 got so much scrutiny isn't just because it was 3D and not hand-drawn, but because the animation itself flipped between feeling very stiff and awkward, or overly smooth and awkward. The way these two characters on the left rotate is a big example of this. It's as if they were inanimate objects being turned around. The movements of the characters feel far too subtle to work in 2D, and really subtle animation is really difficult to pull off if you're not going to go full on 24 frames per second. The reason that hand-drawn animated shows are usually at 12 frames per second is because it takes a lot of drawing. So to compensate for the fewer frames, the animators make sure that every frame counts. This is why artists will intentionally add smear frames if they want to sell the impact of a character moving quickly. The problem with Berserk 2016 is that it goes at 12 frames per second, but the animation isn't trying to compensate for the missing frames. So something like this feels way smoother than something like this, despite having the same frame rate. So as I was animating the characters, I tried making sure that each frame was very distinct from the previous one, even if the characters' movements were a little subtler. In fact, sometimes when I would render out an animation, I would actually go out of my way to delete frames that I felt were messing with the flow and looked too similar to the frame that came before it. I would also mess with the animations in Cinema 4D by stretching out the arms, legs, and neck, just slightly enough to where no one will really notice, but they will help make each keyframe feel a little more unique. Especially since hand-drawn animators can never really be as consistent in keeping in model as a computer would, and so making each body part slightly off actually helps make it feel more natural and more like a 2D animation than it would normally. Oftentimes there would also be rendering issues with the sketch and tune effect, so I would actually have to modify each rendered frame in Photoshop, and sometimes I would have to redraw certain lines by hand, and sometimes even redraw the entire face. However, I found that this actually helped the animation overall, because by making sure that some portions of the characters were hand-drawn, this helped create more of the illusion that these weren't necessarily 3D character models, even though they clearly are. In fact, there were some 3D character models that I intentionally left somewhat unfinished, so that it would force me to draw in the details by hand. Burger King is a big example of this. The details on his crown, his gold necklace, and the lines within his hair, beard, and face were all drawn by hand, and they weren't at all present within the model itself. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the reasons I almost never used a hard shadow from Cinema 4D itself, because by manually painting in shadows instead, this helped the animation flow better. The backgrounds were a bit of a mix of both 2D and 3D elements. Many backgrounds were modified renderings of 3D areas, but there were a few that were entirely made in Photoshop, such as these. All of the Photoshop files were then compiled into After Effects to export out a rendered video. In just about every scene, I would add an adjustment layer with a 4-color gradient filter on top of it, in order to simulate lighting that would affect everything in the frame, background and characters. Depending on the scene, I may also add light rays and color correction as well. Once all of the rendered videos were exported out of After Effects and added onto Final Cut Pro, the last touch to add was the credits. Now, I could have gone the easy route and write everything in English, but I felt that the video wouldn't be complete unless it had Japanese text for the credits. Now, obviously, I can't speak Japanese, and I certainly can't read it either. However, I was able to find this excellent post from Reddit user TyBoss, giving detailed translations and explanations to the most common credits that you will find written in an anime opening sequence. Thanks to this guide, I was able to write out much of the credits. Then, when it came to writing the Japanese text for a lot of English names and brands, it basically took a lot of Googling and use of Google Translate in some areas. Typically, how I went about it is that I would type something out in Google Translate, and then I would copy and paste the Japanese text that Google Translate would send out, and then I would research for it in Japanese in Google to see if it was actually a common enough of a statement that could be viewed in a sentence or an opening credit. Again, I don't know Japanese myself, so for all I know, there might still be errors with how these credits are presented. Given my limited knowledge, I did try my best, but I wouldn't be too surprised if anyone that actually does speak Japanese ends up viewing the video and laughing at the text. Now, since I did basically everything in this video from a visual sense, I had to get creative as to how I was to write out the credits, so that way I wasn't just saying everything was done by Skylar Fox a million times. I cheated a little bit by making some of the credits just list the type of software that was used to make this video. It's not really something you would normally see in official credits, but I wasn't really sure what else to put there besides just plain old nonsense. I did also decide to include in a fake cast. For the cast, I actually googled the actors that had played the mascots of these various brands. I was really hoping to find the actor behind those old Japanese Ronald McDonald commercials that became memes, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find anything, so I just used one of the American actors instead. After the credits were all done, it was just a matter of exporting the final video from Final Cut Pro and uploading it to YouTube. And that was the making of Battle of the Brand. So everyone, I hope this video was a little informative and that you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun working on this project as it was one of my more experimental videos that I had ever worked on. I want to give a special thanks to my patrons and for all of their support, and their names will be listed here on screen. Make sure you also check out Nerd Odyssey, we're really trying to grow, and we'll appreciate your support there as well. As always, thanks a bunch for watching, and take care.